morning, Greg. First of all, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, you told me I had to.
What?
You told me I had to, didn't you?
No, but we really appreciate it because you always add such valuable insight, and we're navigating this unprecedented environment, and many of us are challenged and looking to you for your expertise and guidance. So thank you so much for doing it. We really appreciate it. You and I, we were talking earlier about the strength of the first quarter and where the real estate industry was before this pandemic, hit. And so you said that the quarter one sales activity is somewhat irrelevant when it comes to the current climate in the face of COVID-19. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, after a couple of years of, slowing sales and a really sluggish luxury market, things started to pick up at the end of last year, and contracts being signed in December, January, February were all up significantly from the year before. The first quarter results were encouraging in terms of rising sales and a modest rise in pricing. It finally felt that the market, the buyers and sellers had gotten together and deals were happening. The economy was doing great. We just gotten a great employment report for February. In the US, here in New York City, things were doing really well. Across the country, home sales numbers looked phenomenal. It was a lot of momentum. And then you see how quickly it can get taken away. And so I think it's irrelevant to talk about now because we're still stuck in this economic shutdown, which is pretty much, diminished our market to a fraction of what it typically is. But I think it does give us some perspective. And I think the prior recession, Lehman Brothers, gives us a good idea. A lot of our markets were stronger than the nation coming in, particularly in Manhattan, where inventory, even with all the construction, was very low and the economy was very good. And I think that helped us get out of the recession much faster than people thought. This is not expected to be that long of a recession, probably one of the shortest or the shortest.
Wait a second. Do you think that we're headed into you really think we're headed into a recession? And if so, can you first of all define for everybody what exactly is a recession?
Right. Yeah, we're already in a recession. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, 10 million people have filed for unemployment benefits. And to put it in perspective, the total amount of people employed as of February were 159 million. So a significant part of the workforce is already lost their jobs, not even a month into the lockdown. So that creates, a perspective that, recessions have become more subjective than they used to be. It used to be you had to have 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, and that was a recession. And that's kind of a easy one to follow. And I think people still kind of use that. It's kind of like the definition of a condom. It's kind of been changed into something it's really not. Now they look at many more things. It's not just a strict, here's our 6 straight months of GDP contraction. It's a recession. When you see an unemployment downturn like this, and you know that in the short term, it's only going to get worse, there's no sense in even waiting for the official call. We know that we're in a recession right now. The Wall Street Journal commissioned a study that came out at the beginning of this week, basically saying that more than 25% of the economy is basically shut down. And that's, if you think about it, it doesn't necessarily mean, we have a 25% unemployment rate, but when you think of all the businesses that can't be open, any retail-based business, including to a great extent ours, we've been creative. Yes, stores can still sell stuff online, but restaurants, don't make money by deliveries, and theaters can't be open and arenas can't be open. We all know, how many layoffs we've already seen in those industries. So we are definitely in a recession right now. There's no doubt that the economy is contracting at a pace that we have not seen since the Great Depression. The good news is that it may only be, 2 months to 3 months, and that's what we're all hoping for, because and what most people are predicting. When you have a very strong economy with a 3.5% unemployment rate. GDP was growing at an over 3% clip in the first quarter. It'll probably still be positive because the shutdown really only impacted the last 2 to 3 weeks of March. But the numbers predicted for the second quarter are nightmarish. I mean, there's nothing.
Can I just say that's a good segue? I have a question because I've heard a lot of economists talk about what to expect. And some of them have said it's going to be a V, like a V recovery. And I'm wondering if you agree with that and if you can tell us what a V recovery is and if you think that's really something we should expect.
See, economics everybody thinks is all about numbers, but in this case, it's about letters.
Right?
Yeah,
the alphabet, the V, the U, the L, yeah.
At the risk of being too YMCA-ish, I'm sure everybody knows what a V looks like. But a V is basically a rapid contraction followed by a pretty rapid recovery.
Like boom, boom, pops back up again.
And, how does that happen? Well, if it's basically caused by a shock, and it certainly fits that, and do we have the capacity to come back quickly? With as strong as everything was beforehand, with all the money that's been pumped into the market by the Fed and rates pushed to zero, I think that it will be a V recovery because we know what we need to recover. A lot of times the government will have to try many things to get us out. If you think at Lehman Brothers, we tried TARP, that failed. The stimulus didn't produce the results that we expected. That was really just a Band-Aid. It wasn't until mark-to-market accounting was suspended in March of 2009 that the stock market bottomed and we started selling apartments again and homes in all our markets. So I think that now we know the only thing that gets us out of this is containment of this virus. We're not going to get a vaccine anytime in the next couple of weeks or months. Treatments are proving hopeful, but we got some good news yesterday, particularly in New York, which has become the epicenter for all of this, that, a lot of the cases and hospitalizations and all that is starting to decline. The stock market's very hopeful about that. Great day yesterday. It's up big this morning. So I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this will be a V-shaped recovery. Similar, we had the shortest bear market in stock market history. When you think about it, we fell, so fast. You used to get scared if you saw triple-digit declines, and then when you're seeing 4-digit declines in the Dow on a given day. But we've already gotten out of that bear market. So I think when things are unprecedented, and I think a lot of people, and it's understandable, overestimated potentially the economic damage. I think the stock market did that, which is why it's been able to recover a big chunk of what it lost before there's any real, definitive containment of the virus. So to get back to the letters, a V-shaped is when you basically recover at a very rapid speed, like a V. Then you have a U-shaped where you fall and then you kind of bottom out for a while and you're kind of, in this funk that just keeps going on until you start to recover again. That could describe the last recession in Lehman Brothers where we kind of hit a bottom. But that was, it takes time to get back from most recessions, depending on the cause. We had a financial crisis, a decade ago. That doesn't get solved overnight. And then the worst case scenario is what we call an L, where you kind of just stay at that new level and it becomes sort of a new norm. And you don't really recover to where you were. And I think that, the question is, how long can this legitimately go on? And that's all depends on how long the government is shut down. We know the cure is containment of the virus, reopening of the economy and businesses when it's prudent to do so. And I think we all want to get back to business and feel normal. And I think, and most economists are really predicting a V-shaped recovery because we can't keep the economy closed forever, and I think that's something everybody knows. And unfortunately, I think that decision to reopen is going to have to be made before anybody really feels comfortable doing it, because nobody wants to see anybody else get sick from this. But, these 14-day sort of cycles that go through with this could extend this, and if people can get it again. There's so many unanswered questions.
There are, but in your opinion, which sectors of the economy do you think will recover the fastest or the slowest? Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, when you think about businesses, like restaurants and, that are trying to stay afloat doing takeout, but I think the problem is everybody will get out there at their own comfort and pace. The state can say tomorrow, okay, we're reopened for business, we've deemed it safe. And that doesn't mean everybody's going to go out their door and go look at an apartment or buy a car or go to a restaurant, because people are, depending on, there's been a lot of sort of missteps in this process, a lot of bad information given during this. And I think people are going to be a little suspect of that. So I don't know that anybody's going to, it's not flipping a switch and we recover. But I think, obviously restaurants, you think of theaters, any place that's been basically forced to shut or been limited to a fraction of the business. I think real estate will recover too, because the demand is there. It's only been penting up since the shutdown. And I think people will see in most markets, again, and the areas certainly that we deal in, prices were kind of where they needed to be. And there doesn't necessarily need to be a huge correction in real estate prices to draw buyers in. I just think there needs to be that comfort level to really, go into people's homes and
consumer morale. Like people have to start to feel safe again and feel like they can go outside and they can do the things they were doing. It's going to take a little bit of time before people are confident again, right?
Right, and at their pace. I'll be at a restaurant the first week they're open. I don't know that my mother's leaving my house again, but it's a pace that everybody has to feel comfortable with. But obviously, you look at the industries hit hardest, the ones that hotels. I don't know about. I don't know that a lot of people are going to decide to travel to New York right away, even after kind of a lot of these restrictions are lifted. I think that might be a little slower to come back. And the numbers for the last hotel occupancy rate I saw in New York City was 17%. A lot of them are housing first responders and such now, which is good. But I'm sure they need to be open to higher paying customers and more full. So I think those industries that are restricted now, retail shops are being boarded up now. That's everybody's chomping at the bit to get back to business. And I think
we talked about yesterday, not to cut you off, but you can buy some things online, but when people are making big purchases, like buying a home or buying a car, and even you said like buying sometimes a refrigerator, whatever it is, people are going to need to be going out and looking at those things and doing those things for them to actually pull the trigger on those sorts of items.
Right, because one of the things that I've talked about to a number of people is consumers are roughly 70% of the economy, right? What you and I spend accounts for 70%. The rest is government, basically, and trade, and in business investment. But the hard part is it's very difficult to spend money now. That's why stimulus checks are needed, and they're a good idea as a Band-Aid and a bridge to get us through the worst of this. But people who have a lot of money, I mean, how do you spend it to a great extent? And you think of what, I think about what I spend money on, and everyone can do it themselves. Yeah, you may buy an apartment, off of floor plans, or because you live in the building and you know the place, or, you just think it's a great buy and the virtual tour you took of it was great. But I don't know that you're going to buy a car that way. And I don't know that you want an appliance or something delivered and installed in your house. People have different comfort levels about that, even after you reopen the economy. So I think it's hard when you look and say, all right, I'd like to go out to eat, but I can't. And even if I take out from my favorite restaurant, the bill's a lot less than if I sit there, have a bottle of wine or, and
all that. Yeah, it's a different, just getting back to the stimulus, I want to just touch on that for a second. I had read somewhere that someone compared the pandemic to like a gunshot wound to the economy, and basically saying the stimulus is kind of, stopping the bleeding, so to speak. But the recovery is, you're not the same economy that you were before this pandemic hit. And so do you think that the package is robust enough to get people on their feet and get the economy where it needs to be?
Yeah, I mean, to put it in perspective, it's $2.2 trillion, right? And our economy is 22 trillion. So it's 10% of the US economy. So in that size we've never done before, percentage or dollar amount. So I think it's a significant amount. The question is, does it, like you said, does it totally cure the gunshot wound, right? Or in this case, the virus? And it doesn't. It tries to keep workers whole and companies as whole as possible till they can reopen and be back fully in business to get them through a rough patch. It's also there to help state and local governments bridge their budget gaps and not have to try to come up with drastic cuts or new sources of revenue. So I think in that regard, I think everybody stands. And look, there's already talk about another one that could be upwards of $1 trillion. I think the problem is cutting checks for that many people, and particularly the enhanced unemployment benefits and the new definition or criteria for receiving unemployment. I mean, I've talked to a number of people that say they can't get through. I was watching something today about businesses that can't get any update on the status of their loans. Information is slow to come out on these things, and that holds up how effective they can be. But it's understandable when 10 million people file for unemployment in a 2-week span, that offices that aren't allowed to be open are going to have a hard time helping all those people. And I think that's the issue here. You can give people money, but what are they going to spend it on? How fast are they going to receive it? And I think in this case, it's going to take at a minimum a couple of weeks, hopefully not too much longer. I know they initially said 3 weeks for the stimulus checks, but most people that are getting that or getting the enhanced unemployment benefits will probably think of, buying food and paying rent and things of that nature, not necessarily, buying items that, they don't absolutely need. And I think that's the mode most people are in right now. So I think it's not going to cure the problem. There isn't, I don't think, any amount of money that we would be able to inject into the economy that would provide any real long-term relief. One of the things, about we learned from the last recession was we brought interest rates to zero, and the Fed basically gave banks all this money to lend, and it just didn't wind up in consumers' pockets. And if they did get it, they didn't spend it. Again, 70% of the economy is based on what we spend. So if we can't spend or we're not comfortable in spending, that dampens the initial impact of this. But look, it's the government too saying we're here for you. We don't want you to worry about, paying your rent or getting groceries. So we're here to help.
So tell me a little bit about, what do you think the impact is going to be for people? I know they've been able to defer paying their mortgage for 90 days, and some tenants are not paying the rent. And so all this deferment of things that are to be paid, how does that impact us in the economy?
Well, it's certainly helpful to those people to keep the money for maybe more pressing needs. We did see, at least in New York, that most people did pay their rent, according to some surveys that were conducted. There's a story we put in last week in research, if you want to check it out. So that was good news. But, the question is, will that next month, the situation is going to be worse. There'll be more people unemployed. So I think that the problem is that when it's not clear what the criteria is, people might take advantage of this. And I think landlords have to worry, because if a large number of tenants aren't paying their rent, they're going to have a hard time paying their taxes. Are they going to get relief from that? We've had a lot of very let's just say it nicely, pro-tenant legislation passed. Mm-hmm. And, I think landlords have taken a beating over that. Now, they want to help. I don't think anybody's eager anywhere in this country right now to kick people out. There's been a moratorium on evictions in many places. So I don't know. The mortgage thing is a little trickier because, those servicing companies now, a lot of stories have come out, still have to pay, the security holders money. So if they're not receiving the mortgage payments, the question is, where do they get the money to do that? And banks and servicers are being a lot more restrictive now because they realize that this could affect their bottom line and the business they do. And one thing we don't want as the real estate industry is to see lending get tight again. I mean, that was one of the problems after the last recession was mortgage standards had overcorrected in terms of being too strict. But we'll see. Hopefully, again, this will be a temporary thing. It's not clear, with the if you don't pay your mortgage, when and how that gets paid back.
They're still defining all of that because this is all new territory for everyone. It's a complete, it's unexpected.
Right, and you want relief out there, and the markets, react positively when like the stimulus is passed and it's agreed to. Wow, the government's actually doing something other than fighting, and let's nice to see them back to work. But in the rush to get things done, it's always like, we'll pass it now and then we'll figure out exactly what it means. For real estate brokers, there's relief in this stimulus potentially, but to figure out exactly how to qualify and the documents you need, this stuff just can take time and be very hard to get answers to anything right now because even your accountant or attorneys aren't really going to know.
No, it's discovery for everybody. So, well, the Fed cut interest rates to near zero, but mortgage rates are rising in some cases. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, the first thing to remember is, what the Fed is cutting is the federal funds rate, which is an overnight rate, which doesn't necessarily move in the same direction as long-term rates. We saw this last year when we had sort of, an inverted flattening of the yield curve and then a temporary inversion where long-term rates were actually, in some cases, lower than short-term rates because the Fed was raising rates at that time. So it's not a direct correlation. If the Fed eases 25 basis points, that doesn't mean mortgage rates are going down by 0.25%. Also, lenders had been sort of besieged by refis and had pushed rates all higher because of that. So I guess the key thing for mortgage rates is they're still incredibly low. There's always going to be modest fluctuations. Remember, too, that there's this, the effect of the stock market and the volatility. When the stock market really starts to go haywire and people take their money out, they tend to, look for a safe investment, and treasuries provide that. So that can bring rates down regardless of, the fact that short-term rates, they're not going to be touched again for a very long time. They brought them as low as they can bring them. All the Fed can do now is continue to try to inject liquidity into the markets, and there's even talk about the Fed buying stocks, which, remember, TARP didn't go over too well with a lot of the public, particularly those outside of Wall Street. So, the idea of them actually buying, I don't think it's going to come to that. I think stocks overcorrected and have now sort of found a better range of where they should be.
But, Greg, it seems like every time we think that the stock market has calmed down and things are decent again, or they're picking up, all of a sudden you see this volatility. It's like I said to you yesterday, I think that I feel like I'm on the most turbulent flight of my life, that it keeps doing these crazy, ups and downs. You think that's finally settling down?
Well, to a degree. I mean, it's still an unbelievably volatile period. If you want to have fun, we put an article about the Dow's week last week in Research, or you can go on CNBC's website. Look at the daily percentage change in the S&P 500 over the last 2 weeks. I mean, it's a case where you're down, 4% one day, up 4% the next day, down 4%. And what's changed in the economy? It's only gotten worse, right? So you would think you wouldn't see a lot of positive days, but the stock indexes are forward-looking indicators. They're as much a mood indicator as anything else. And with the stimulus being passed, and with the hope from some of the news we got yesterday that the curve of this virus may be flattening here in New York. And
yeah, we think we're in the peak right now, is what some experts are saying, right? So.
Right, and I think that's that would be good news. So I was to try to put it bluntly, people buy stocks because they think they're going to go up. That's why you buy a stock. It's not necessarily what the value of it right now is. It's because it's like an investment property. If I buy a rental building, I'm going to be, more concerned with the rent roll and when can I raise rents and how long are these tenants in place, whether it's commercial or residential. So it's not necessarily looking at sales comps of other buildings. And I think this, we have to remember that people want to know, what does this mean for housing prices? I know we'll talk more about this later, but we cannot look at the stock market as a gauge of how much we have to correct, because it's not that simple. And that the stock market again is forward looking. It's had many corrections in the past decade. This is really the first one that we've had, and in most of our markets it's been going on for a couple of years because it's hard to correct when the economy is good. That's a very tough environment to get prices down quickly. So I think the stock market, again, it's good for us in this industry to really see what people's moods are. And it seems like right now people are feeling in a better mood. They're more optimistic. The economic data that's coming out is lagging. It's important to remember that. One of the things that probably confused people was we had an employment report on Friday that only showed a loss of 700,000 jobs. And you go, wait a minute, 10 million people filed for unemployment. Well, those surveys are conducted in the beginning of the month, and they're conducted multiple ways. The civilian measure, which is what we call the household survey, which is where the unemployment rate comes from, showed a couple of million jobs lost. So, the economic data that's come out has to be looked. You want to look at what we call high frequency data. And right now, the biggest data point to look at is initial claims for unemployment. The record had been in the 600,000s. We crushed that 2 weeks ago, and we doubled it last week. And that goes back to 1967, that statistic. So we don't have the Great Depression numbers, which would be the only thing even remotely relevant to the situation we're in now. So I think that we have to expect volatility to continue because, look, cases are rising in Louisiana and other parts of the country. We don't know if people can get it who have had it before. We don't know if it's coming back. And I think all of that stuff is just we get used to it kind of quickly, I think. We saw it during the Lehman Brothers. I remember watching the TARP vote, and when TARP didn't pass the first time, it was voted on, and to see the Dow fall over 1,000 points, it was like, wow. But then surprisingly, it's a par for the course these days.
Yeah, and then the market came back and it roared, in the next quarter. So, I think that's what happened after 9/11 too. It was so quiet. And then come January, it was another, it was like all this pent up demand. So hopefully we will see something similar to that. But there's a lot of speculation about, prices were correcting, as you and I spoke about earlier. Do you think there's going to be a further correction? Or should we expect to see prices come down further?
Well, in some areas they'll have to, in some of our markets, and and in some areas they were declining for years beforehand. I think the key thing to remember is the timing of this. Even if a best case scenario, we just found out here in New York that we're pretty much closed through April 29th. Florida has just closed, as of last week. So let's say we get back to work in the middle of May. Again, it's hard to predict the pace at which buyers will return. They're going to come back in their own time, on their own schedule. And I think that the tools that brokers have been using to do things virtually will become more common, because I don't know that handshaking is ever going to go away, as some people have predicted. But I do think, out of horrible situations and wars come some of the best innovations to the economy that are really helpful. So I think even if people started coming out in the middle of May when we open, it's going to take 2 months for closings really to start to happen or more. And we're going to have the same problem in all of our markets as we had right after Lehman Brothers. Where are the comps? How do I price something when nothing has really sold over the past couple of months in this category? I mean, if you're going to price a $20 million apartment in Manhattan, or a home out in the Hamptons or something, in Miami, that at least in most areas, that market is pretty frozen right now. We see some new development closings coming in, but most of those were signed long before. Yeah. Most of the deals we're seeing in New York City are, under 2 million. And a lot of them have been signed in the last 2 to 3 weeks and closed quickly, which is good news considering the hoops that people need to jump through. But the hardest part is going to be there won't be enough comps initially, not just for brokers, but for appraisers to really know where the market is. And as much as we'd want to say, all right, take 10% off everything or 15%, or you're good, yeah. Prices were in most areas, again, the data looked very good and very strong in terms of the volume of sales being done. So if the economy comes back quickly, you can argue, and with inventory low in many areas, especially considering where it was a year ago, there may not be enough correction, a big enough correction that you need to take. It's just the advice, it would be, what I would say in any market. Spend your time now, looking at what little is being done. Every day we get a feed from the city about all the recorded sales, and, there's still deals being recorded. And those deals were done at the end of March. They were closed in very trying times. So that is your first indicator of where prices may need to be. Because if you did a deal in the middle of this, then you were really priced correctly. And I think that's step one, but keep watching as the market comes back. And also pay, very close attention, I know you do this already, to what's coming on. Because, right now in Manhattan, there are about 6,100 apartments for sale, but that could change dramatically if things start to heat up quickly, because a lot of you have been advising your sellers not to come on now, because the odds are they're probably just going to sit anyway. So how many of those will jump into the mix? And I think that will be the best thing you could do to position yourself is to just really look at everything coming on, anything in contract. What was the asking price? I need to get into that range. Where's my competition? I need to get below it. I don't think this is going to be a huge panic sale time. I think it's going to be a slow go in the beginning, just like after Lehman Brothers. And just cutting the price by a certain percent is not going to necessarily get your listing sold initially. Look, it's going to be a lot easier to sell, single family homes than apartments, I think, initially, because especially, out in the Hamptons and in Palm Beach, where I can drive myself to the showing and there won't be anybody home. And, I don't have to go through a lobby. I don't have to see workers. I don't have to take a subway. I don't have to take an Uber or a taxi. So I think we have to take all this in, because it sounds like we're saying this too often, but this is an unprecedented situation.
It is. I mean, it is. If you had to anticipate or predict the housing market, let's say the stay-at-home is lifted the end of April or early May, let's just say that, and, things start to open up again. Could you, and I know you're just, giving your opinion, what do you see as our picture for the housing market once things open up again and people can leave their houses again and we can go back to work?
Once the comfort level comes back, I think it gets busy very quickly, because there are people that have been putting off these decisions, not just for these months of quarantine or weeks of quarantine, but for a couple of years in some cases. And I think they see the opportunity now to get back in. And sellers, have been on a long time, even though, days on the market is not being shown. People know when a listing hit the market. And I think it could lead to a very active, probably fourth quarter for closings. I think, the third quarter for closings is going to be a little slow, because, if you come back in May, again, the earliest you're going to close is probably July or maybe August. So that's going to be a slow go in the beginning. And I think we'll pick up steam. I don't think the election will play as much as, I think one of the things about the election that scared everybody was the negative feelings, our elections and mostly our political environment tend to bring up in a lot of people. I don't know that people are going to be as laser focused on that. I think the one thing I've enjoyed out of this is, we're not really talking about the election.
Yeah.
And,
that's been a gift to not have to be in that sort of environment. Everybody's focus has been shifted, and that's been kind of a unifier, so to speak.
Right. And we do get reminded that, all across the United States, most people are really good people. They do care about their neighbors and they want to help. And some of the stories of people helping have been very touching. And I think that's what we need. I mean, we don't want this to happen, but it does bring out the best in people. And I think that's very good. And I think that momentum will carry us. I mean, look, when we go look at the year as a whole, it's not going to be a great year because we're basically going to lose, 3 months or more of activity. That's a whole quarter that's going to amount to a fraction of what it normally would be. But, we
could make it up though. I mean, there could be, we could make it up later on, maybe in the following year or in the end in the fourth quarter, not completely, but a percentage of that could be made up.
Well, I think I'm not going to say the fundamentals of the economy are strong because they're not when 10 million people get laid off in 2 weeks. But if you know the reason and you know the cure, then you can really be optimistic about how we come out of this. And unfortunately, there are some people whose jobs won't come back and there's some businesses that won't reopen. That is terrible. But I think that we will see a very strong recovery. I mean, to put it in perspective, if you want to hear a scary number followed by a more positive number, the St. Louis Federal Reserve scared everybody last week by predicting, they didn't even necessarily say it was a worst case scenario, that the unemployment rate is going to reach 32% potentially. Because there are roughly 67 million jobs in the United States that are at risk strictly because of the virus. And, that they have to be, these are industries that have to be closed or severely hampered, where people can't work and restaurants obviously can't make the money they make and theaters can't open. And they predict roughly 47 out of those 67 million jobs are going to be lost. Goldman Sachs has a slightly more optimistic look at it. They're predicting unemployment getting as high as 15%, with second quarter GDP being negative 34%. I mean, if you think back to the last recession, as bad as it was, we didn't have any GDP contractions over 5% in any one quarter. But they're predicting a very strong recovery. So the economy contracts 34% in the second quarter, but rebounds 19% in the third quarter. So with that kind of momentum, I think we can expect a pretty good end of the year. It's for most of our areas, it's a slow point of the year anyway. But I think that people that have put off buying and that we're starting to get back in the market are going to be chomping at the bit to get back in. Plus, there's always the anecdotal hope that after being stuck in your home for long enough, you may want a bigger or a nicer home. So I don't have to stand, hide in the corner of my bedroom to do these webinars. But I think
there's been I spoke to a few different reporters and they said, do you think there's going to be this mad rush of people, particularly leaving New York City after this is all over because they realize people are living too close together. They don't like to be in this sort of vertical living. And I totally disagree with that. I think people will stick by New York City. It's the best city in the world. And I think it offers so much to so many people. It's the city of possibility and hope, and I think that, maybe a few people, might, want to go to a place where they can have a house, but this is New York City. I don't think people give up on New York City.
Right. I mean, nobody was ever going to live downtown again after 9/11.
Exactly.
No one's going to live by the water ever again after Sandy. We hear this all the time. And I think that, you tell a New Yorker that and they're like, oh yeah, I'll show you. I do think that in combination with some other things that have gone on the last couple of years, it certainly doesn't help. You know, we've already seen a flight out of New York because of the loss of the SALT deduction, essentially, that has led people to go to Florida. Hopefully they're all going to Miami and Palm Beach and talking to our brokers. But I think that's part of it. New York's willingness to continue to raise taxes. Luckily, New York State passed their budget last week without any new taxes, but that doesn't mean they won't enact them.
Right.
You know, we were happy the pied-à-terre tax wasn't in the budget, but that
we have to still keep being vigilant about that. Just because it wasn't in the budget, it might show its ugly face again.
I think what New York has to remember is, particularly New York City, it needs its tax base right now, because fighting this pandemic and, you know, on top of the subways and dealing with, you know, public housing, which needed billions before this, and then you add in all the costs for the, you know, the medical services they're providing and the taxes they're not going to receive. I think every municipality needs to protect their tax base, because if government wants to help people, it needs money to do that. And I think, you know, if New York State continues to up millionaires' taxes and talk about pied-à-terre taxes, it's going to push more people out. It doesn't mean everybody's going to leave, but New York State in particular has very progressive taxes, and it doesn't take that many, you know, wealthy to leave to notice.
Yeah, and also people who want to buy here. We already have that stepped up mansion tax. We have all, you know, so we want to keep people, you know, motivated to invest in the city. So,
and the governor, to his credit, said, you know, when he signed the budget, that this is not the time to raise people's taxes. And I think, you know, we're a city of immigrants. We welcome everybody here.
that's
And
right.
that should include part-time residents and visitors. And I think anybody that wants to be part of New York City's economy should be welcomed. And I think that we have to remember that. And I think that's one thing you don't want to see come out of this, is that states and cities with budget caps start hiking taxes to try to, you know, make up their difference. I know that many states are strapped for cash. You know, here in New York City, we've been lucky. Our economy has been good enough where New York City hasn't been hurting for money yet. But that's obviously all changed now. And New York State, you know, had to cut spending significantly to get their budget passed.
I have Greg, if you don't mind, I'm going to start. We have a bunch of questions. So
Sure. I'm going to take a drink of water if you don't mind.
have some water, please. So I am not going to name who's asking the question. I'm just going to read the question.
Okay.
This one says, I have clients buying in a new development, no C of O yet. I know you can't give exact details. I know you can give exact details for this project, but is AG, I don't know.
Froze up there for a minute, Bess. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Okay. Basically, it sounds like this agent has a client buying in a new development with no C of O, and so they obviously, you know, things are sort of on hold right now. But do we know when the AG is going to be moving forward with the Department of Buildings?
I don't. I haven't heard anything. We know that, you know, construction is for most, not a lot of projects, has been stopped. You know, and I think getting answers from any city or state agency right now is very difficult. So it's hard to say. I mean, the best suggestion is to have your lawyer or their lawyer reach out to the appropriate agencies and find out what they can, because we're all just trying to keep up with the memos and the rules that are being written. And, you know, we've seen a lot of them come through as they pertain to the Department of Buildings here in New York City, appraisals and such. So we're getting a lot of questions about that. And at this point, like so many other things, we don't have all the answers. But I think that's something that you really need a lawyer to make those calls and get some hard answers on that. But even the developer may say, I can't tell you. You know, I don't know when I can finish construction, or I don't know when the AG is going to be able to sign off on this. Because remember, they're not in their office just like we're not in our offices.
Right.
And that, you know, everything, including government, you know, can grind to a halt. And I think that's something you may just have to be patient. I know it's hard for a new development buyer to not know the status of their unit. But I think it's going to take a little bit of time before and once the workforce returns, they'll be able to answer this better. But here in New York, the AG's office is very slow with a lot of things. So it's hard to really predict.
What is your opinion of the movement to ignore the social distancing order and open businesses? As an economist, do you agree or disagree?
Well, I don't agree with ignoring orders, but I do think there is a trade-off. You know, I'm an economist. I have a brother who's a doctor. So you would think we would fight about this, but we don't. I think that the concern is that you're going to push unemployment probably over 15 to 20%, just by staying closed probably through the end of April into early May. If you close it through May, who knows how high unemployment could go. It could reach the St. Louis Fed's numbers of 30% or more. And that will no longer really lead to a V-shaped recovery. And if you as a government want to help people, and you need money to do that. You can't just borrow money indefinitely. I mean, the federal government can apparently, but state and local governments can't. You need tax dollars to come in. And I think from a lot of people can say, okay, you told me to stay home for a month. I've stayed home for a month. In New York City, it's going to be more than 6 weeks if we go through the end of April. So then the question is, how long can you keep the economy closed when what you're saying is helping, but what is the threshold for going back to work? And I think I'm glad I don't have to make that decision, but you do have to take that into consideration, because a global depression, which this could, it is a worst case scenario, could kill, I'm not going to say it's going to kill more people in the virus, but it's going to be really bad. You think about how bad things are now for so many people. 10 million Americans have lost their jobs in the last 2 weeks. Yeah. It's only going to get worse. And then, their businesses, it won't just be the smaller businesses that won't be able to stay afloat. It'll be larger businesses. And then the stock market could lose an astronomical amount of value. So I think everybody is considering this. You can't just like you can't pin an economist down to make a prediction about anything. I don't think the doctors, anything they say gets posted all over the web, and everybody's reading it and taking it as word. You have to open the economy. I expect that's going to be sometime in May, because going longer is just so devastating. I don't think we can't stay closed indefinitely. A lot of the scope of businesses, again, severely impacted, will go up astronomically, and it'll be very hard for government to be able to provide services for people without the tax revenue. And how many more stimuluses are you going to need if that happens? And that's, our national debt's approaching $24 trillion now. And, that's, we can get away with that because rates are low, but it's something that we do have to think about. And these trade-offs, unfortunately, are decisions that governments have to make at times. And look, it's the same thing with 9/11. We shut down the airlines for a while, and we made all these strict changes. At some point, they get lifted too. So I think it's something that they're considering. The president talks about it all the time. And I think at some point people have to go back to work. A lot of us are working, but unfortunately I don't sell anything other than my story, I guess. But I think we need people to be able to go back to work. And I think the problem too is with the weather. I mean, I try to go for a walk when I can, staying away from everybody. But there's a park 2 blocks from my house, and I see all these cars there. Thank God they've shut down the playgrounds now. It's going to be hard. If you tell people they have to stay in their house through the end of May, I think you'll see more people ignoring it because they can't. I mean, I think people have. It's like Sandy. It was a novelty for those of us that lost power for a couple of days. Hey, we'll play board games with our kids. We'll go to bed early. We'll grill outside, and we'll do this stuff. And then about a week into it, it was maddening. And I think as much as we're trying to, I don't know about you, but I can't have fun with my son because all I'm thinking about is how long this is going to go on, what it means to the economy, what it means to our industry, how we're going to get all this stuff done with coming back. Are we going to be able to hire the workers back fast enough too? That's another concern. And will their jobs, a lot of these people will have to find jobs in other industries possibly.
Yeah, there's an enormous amount of stress, health-wise, of course, safety, and also economically. And so people are struggling with all of that. And it's really been a challenge. Okay, just two more questions, and then Greg, we'll let you get back to playing the guitar. Do you have any details, or have you heard anything from appraisers? I know they're doing these sort of drive-by appraisals.
Right.
Have you heard anything about the numbers coming in lower? Or I personally have not heard any details about that, but have you?
I haven't heard about that, but somebody did ask the question, and go on the Appraisal Institute's website. There were new guidelines issued by Fannie and Freddie for appraisals. And I know this isn't a lot of what we do, but they're now there's a lot more leeway for appraisers to do, even in some cases I've heard drive-by appraisals, but they can do them virtually. They don't have to visit the property in most cases these days, or they can as long as they practice social distancing. I spoke to Michael Vargas at Vanderbilt while we traded emails about this, and he says, yeah, they're getting their appraisals done, and in some cases they do still have to visit. But I think just like we're being more flexible, and and notaries are being flexible, and I think that's an industry that they realize they have to allow some of these things. I know drive-by appraisals were vastly blamed for the housing crisis of a decade ago, but in this case, there's a legitimate reason why you wouldn't necessarily want appraisers coming into apartments. So if you go on the Appraisal Institute, it's a good website. They have the latest information posted there. You can see the changes, and hopefully it's not holding up activity, I guess is the
that's
way to put it.
Have you heard anything, Greg, about jumbo loans becoming harder to get in this environment?
I have not, and I think the concern with jumbos is that banks have to hold them in most cases, right? Because they can't sell them to Fannie and Freddie. So when that happens, when the mortgage-backed security market freezes, which it hasn't, because that's not the problem here. I think banks are going to be a little bit cautious about the loans they make, because they a lot of these things that are being done to help the economy don't necessarily help them. And I think I've heard about banks, sort of requiring more of a relationship to lend in some cases, and it being harder if you're not a longstanding client of a bank to get jumbo loans. But that's not the problem right now. I mean, we certainly want mortgages to be, is it not easier to get, but we don't want to see an over tightening like we did a decade ago. But that's not what's going to hurt our market. I think that'll come back once the economy opens up. I think they'll be looking to lend money, and I think that'll correct itself pretty quickly.
Okay, well, Greg, lastly, I would love to hear your piece of advice to everyone, what you think they should be doing, anything that your pearls of wisdom that you offer, which are so valuable and that we cherish so much. Could you share those with everybody?
A lot of pressure to put on me. I think from a business standpoint, this is a good time to start working on your plan for what you're going to do when you come back. You should be looking at your business plan often and really think about, and also what you can take away from this in terms of virtual showings and things of that, and how you can use that even when the market opens up. But there are still closings everywhere. Just keep track of what's selling now, because that's the only gauge you have of where prices need to be when things open up. And I think get ready, get yourself physically and emotionally ready to get back to work. I think that we all need a hobby to get us away from this, whether it's guitar or mahjong in some people's cases. Bess, I think, see, there you go. I think we need to take care of ourselves, and that's easy to forget when we're laying on a couch watching depressing news or ready to, smack whoever.
That's not a good idea. I think not watching news around the clock, I think that's bad for your mental state. And you should, like you said, you got to take care of yourself and
take care of yourself and be ready by, getting familiar with all the tools. We always tell people, do you know how to use all the features in your listing system? Or are you looking at reports? Our friends in Florida, hello. You guys have an MLS in both areas that provides you with a wealth of information. Here in New York, we do things a little differently, but it doesn't mean we don't have weapons. Obviously, historical data is not going to be the thing you want to look at. To send somebody 10 years of appreciation of pricing it doesn't mean anything. And a lot of people want to look to past recessions as a gauge to how we recover from this, and that's not going to be helpful at all either. I mean, our last recession was a financial crisis, mainly caused by real estate overvaluation and Wall Street shenanigans. That's not what caused this. This is a virus. It has nothing to do with the economy or housing. It's a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's unique.
It's unique. And I think, trying to say, well, prices fell this amount after Lehman Brothers, let's use that as a gauge. You could just easily miss your mark. You could correct and cut your prices too much. It's going to be a very slow, well, at least it's going to feel like a very slow restart to business, because it's not like stocks. As soon as you ring that bell, trades start happening and the Dow moves immediately. You know where it is. Here, you're going to be looking every day. That's all the closings we had. That's all that went in the contract. But use those real-time indicators. And that's really what's come onto the market and what's gone in contract. And make sure you know how to do that, and make sure you know the reports available to yourself, and think about how you want to reach out to clients and how you want to talk to them when you do have the opportunity and they are listening. I think that's the best you could do, is be as prepared as possible.
And communicate with your colleagues in the real estate community, because they have their pulse on also what's going on. So sharing that information back and forth is going to give you real-time info, right?
Right.
So
and they're your audience too.
Your audience. That's right.
And I think, we are sharing information with anybody, as best we can, what little, there is. But I think this is also a chance for us to come together and step up our game, and in an industry of co-broking, to really get to know co-brokers and to really help each other get through this. And I think webinars are a great way to do that, and to keep people feeling engaged. There's this feeling of disengagement we all have because we're not with the people we see every day, and I don't have my staff, and your brokers aren't out showing, and I think that feeling will come back. But as of now, I think we're all looking for something to take its place, and things like this, hopefully are helpful.
Yeah, and sharpening your tools. Come back with your 2.0 game. Get in there as soon as things open up. So, well, Greg, I just want to say that you are so insightful and helpful, and you really share meaningful info, and you are so loved by Brown Harris Stevens. So thank you so much for all that you do for us. You're really the best.
Well, you're pretty good too, Bess.
I don't play the guitar though, Greg. You do.
To step up my game and go to 2.0, I ordered a ukulele, so I'm going to learn to play that to keep my mind sharp. But I want to say to all the BHS brokers out there that, and everybody that's watching, we are going to get through this. We are going to come back. This is one of those moments where we prove how strong we are as a nation and how strong our markets are. And we're here to help you. Just again, a lot of you are emailing me or sales directors or attorneys or appraisers. It's very hard to get information right now and to get answers to questions because agencies aren't open. People, aren't responding to emails quick. So please understand it's very hard for us to get some of the answers to your questions in a timely manner, and we're doing the best we can because we want you back in business as soon as possible.
Thank you, Greg. Everybody keep your spirits up. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everybody.
Bye.